So we are going to be examining the claim that every example of a man having multiple wives in the Bible ended up badly. We're going to be talking about why that wouldn't be true and why that wouldn't mean that something would be a sin, and how God doesn't use that type of condemnation for anything else in the Bible, right? So, first things first, let's say this is true. Let's say it's true that every situation that a man, where he had multiple wives, ended up badly. Are we saying that it ended up badly because he had the multiple wives? Because this is a situation where if we're trying to have an honest comparison between monogamy and polygyny, then we have to have the same standard, right? We can't have an impossible standard for this category and almost no standard for this category. If a situation happens, ends up bad, or a man's life ends up bad, and he happened to have multiple wives, is multiple wives relevant? For example, let's say I had three wives and I'm on the way to work, and I get hit by a drunk driver, or I'm coming home from work or coming home from a wrestling tournament and I get hit by a drunk driver, I die, or I end up paralyzed. My life did not end up the way I wanted it to, and it did not end up in a way that anybody would aspire for their life to end up. Is that relevant? Is my marital situation relevant to that situation? Because if I was unmarried and that happened, then would you say, well, this is a reason why to be unmarried, why to stay unmarried, or why to not be unmarried? And if let's say I had one wife and that happened, would that be an argument as to why not to only have one wife, why to have two, or why to have zero? Right? Nobody would make that argument, but in order to try to believe their claim, that's the jump you would have to make. Even if you make those jumps, my second point, it's simply not true, right? They try to call certain situations bad to fit their narrative, but it's a circular argument. They only believe that it's bad. The thing that they believe is bad about the situation is the fact that the man has multiple wives, and then they try to use the situation and say, "See, having multiple wives is bad." Um, and that's the case in the situation of Jacob. So let's get into it. I don't want to take too long on this type of video. First things first, let's look at the very first example of a man having multiple wives, Lamech. I think that if you ask multiple men about that story, his family life is how you will want your family life to end up when it comes to raising children and the type of sons that he had. People say the main purpose of marriage is to have kids and foster the upbringing of children. No one can say objectively that his three sons aren't great examples of three sons, right? His three sons came up really well. We don't get anything about his daughter, but he had three sons and a daughter. Had a great family life. Um, yeah, he ended up getting attacked. He killed somebody in what seemed to be very clearly self-defense. Right, he had killed the man for wounding him, a young man for striking him, and he ended up going away because he was scared that somebody was going to kill him. In my head, that's pretty unfortunate. Like, it's unfortunate how that ended up. I don't think that if that same as that thing happened today, a man had one wife, his sons were the CEOs or like pioneers in these crazy industries, and he ended up having to go away because of something that people would say, well, see, his marriage life was bad. No one would connect it to his marriage life if he had one wife, and we don't connect that ending to his marriage life. So when it comes to his marriage, when you say ended up bad, I don't think a situation. If I was trying to describe something as bad, and another point I wanted to make is these are the same people that always say description, not prescription, but they're taking stories and situations that are described and trying to say that God was trying to use this as an indirect prescription. It would be like if, besides telling us bestiality was wrong, he used a story of somebody having sex with a dog and they end up getting a crazy STD. And then now it's like, well, that clearly shows, like, he straight up told us to not do this and that it's disgusting and that it's sinful to do this type of thing. Same thing with homosexuality. He gave us a story about Sodom and Gomorrah, but he also told us straight up, men are not to lay with men in the way that you're supposed to lay with women, right? So very straightforward. Yes. So that's not a case of something ended up bad because the man had multiple wives at all. In the same way that when Cain murdered his brother Abel, that was the first murder in the Bible, we do not say, man, see, he had one wife, therefore having one wife makes you violent and angry and all these things. That would make no sense. That's just dishonest. Cain killed Abel because he killed Abel. That's something that was in him. That's what he did. It was cold-blooded murder. Abel did not wound him first. I mean, a wound is crazy. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a small word. We already had a video, a 22-minute video just about the story of Lamech and how the church has handled it in their delusion, just because they hate the idea of a man having multiple wives. So they have drugged this man's reputation through the mud. And again, the original sin came through Adam and Eve, which was a monogamous marriage, but nobody would blame the monogamy. So let's try to be fair on both sides. All right, next story, the story of Jacob. They try to say the story of Jacob is bad, and I don't understand how. Every marriage has fights. Every marriage has seasons. Pastors like harp on this over and over and over again, that Satan would attack your marriage and all these things. Let's hear what this dude has to say about why the story of Jacob isn't good and how it's very
And Abraham's marriage to Hagar, that does not go well either. Sarah gets,
which I agree. The marriage between Abraham, Hagar, and Sarah did not go well. Pastors try to use that as a situation of faithlessness. This is not understanding the history, but I believe it didn't go well because the sin of Hagar and Sarah. In the gynocentric type of church that we have in today's world, and that we kind of always had, men are very obsessed with women, and try to make them happy and all of these things, and almost not crying that they don't take accountability, but they never hold them accountable. Their jealousy was the sin that caused the strife in that situation, right? And if that situation was bad, the angel of the Lord wouldn't have came. Like, by his nature, the angel of the Lord wouldn't have came and told Hagar to go back to that situation, right? But when she ran away, but they should have been adults and been mature and like treated each other civilly, but they did not. And somehow, some way, that's Abraham's fault. That's not Abraham's fault. If you want to say that's the man's fault, then we need to take all of women's rights away, because you cannot have, if you do not have a certain authority over a woman, you can't have responsibility. Your responsibility cannot be higher than the authority, and he cannot tell them shut up and make nice. And I don't want you guys to fight ever again. Clearly, they fought on their own. They didn't really care what they were supposed to be doing. So that's not Abraham's fault. If women have a certain sinful nature, that sinful nature needs to be addressed and done away with. It cannot be coddled and babied, or because women don't want to address that sinful nature, then we're gonna put a restriction on men that God never put on them, and unfortunately that's the route that has been taken, and it has led to other sin that men commit, all in the name of trying to protect women in a way that just isn't required or even smart, because people will tell you that even in monogamous situations, women will still get jealous over silly stuff, right? So should you just constantly move the goalposts and call a woman for being jealous? But this situation did not end up well.
She's jealous. She kicks her out. She nearly dies in the desert. Same thing with Jacob. There's strife and everything.
Same thing with Jacob. There's strife and everything. This guy has no idea what he's talking about at all. So we're gonna go here. Now we try to say, and again, I showed the same thing with the story of Lamech. People will try to go back and describe a situation as bad. It's circular reasoning. So polygyny is bad because this situation ended up bad, or this situation was not good. The only reason you believe this situation was not good is because he had multiple wives. So having multiple wives is bad because the situation was bad. This situation was only bad because he had multiple wives, right? Because every marriage has strife. Oh, my bad. Let's look at the definition of strife. You type in strife: angry or bitter disagreement over fundamental issues, conflict. Every marriage doesn't have strife. Like, if there's a situation where a man and a wife are experiencing strife in their marriage, no one would say, see, this is why you shouldn't get married. Like in the Christian church, see, this is why marriage is bad. Or, man, if y'all arguing all the time, bro, if you add 2 more wives, man, you won't be as worried about her. So that will fix the strife. You know? So it's being dishonest. If strife happens in a monogamous marriage, it's because Satan is attacking your marriage. It's because we're sinful humans and we are not perfect. All right? We live in our, we're fleshly beings, so there's going to be strife. It's never because of the monogamy. However, if monogamy happens, if strife happens in the situation, in the polygynous situation, then it's because of the polygyny. That's very dishonest. These people are lying. It's unequal weights and measures, right? It's double standards. It's judging one thing by a different standard than the other. It's not honest. But what does the Bible have to say about it, right? We should care about what the Bible has to say. Jacob's situation, his marriages was never deemed bad. It's only deemed bad today because we're trying to fit a certain narrative. Because it's hard to say that the people of Israel came from this man and his four wives. So we have to try to make it sound like, oh, it was bad and all these things, when that's not the case. It says in Ruth 4:11, "We are witnesses," said the elders and all the people at the gate. "May the Lord make the woman entering your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel." They consider that situation good. It's considered good by them. Right? They know the story, and that's a good situation. Rachel and Leah had a season of fighting. It was literally a season. It was not their entire lives. We're not showing them fighting after the fact. And even they are, if somebody fights for 20 years, for 40 years, for all this time, that still doesn't make marriage. No one should be married, right? But moving on from that point, Leah was completely delusional. And the fact that Leah's delusion is never brought up in the story just shows how obsessed with women and gynocentric the church is, and why you can't trust what these pastors and these church leaders say. Because think about this: Jacob saw Rachel and made his intentions clear from the beginning. He made a deal with her father to work for him for 7 years to marry this girl. Now, 7 years. Imagine your first day of middle school, your first day of 6th grade, all the way until your high school graduation. That's almost 7 years. Imagine how long that is. Leah saw this man working for her sister for all this time. She and her father devises a plan to deceive him. So deceit, that's a sin. That's an actual sin. So he can have sex with her and end up marrying her first. He then says, "Man, this sucks. I worked 7 years for Rachel. I will work 7 more years." So he worked 14 years for this girl, right? Obviously, he's more attracted to Rachel than Leah. Leah already knew this, right? Leah was aware of this. Yet, when he showed Rachel more attention, she called Rachel the husband stealer. This is peak female delusion. And for some odd reason, we have made this into a Jacob problem. Jacob was honest from the beginning. "I like how Rachel looked. I want to marry Rachel. Here's the deal. I will work for you 7 years." And he fulfilled his end of the deal. Why are we not putting any of the blame on what the women did? And then if people talk about the women's jealousy, it's, oh, Jacob shouldn't have put them in that situation. That's not how sin works. Women are adults. They are responsible for their own sin. If you don't want them to have responsibility, then they cannot have any authority. And now you have to take away their rights. You see what I'm saying? Like, Jacob did not have control of Rachel and Leah. And they were jealous because of kids. Once they had kids, everything was handy dandy. A lot of women, if you go talk to a couple right now who is going through IVF or trying to get pregnant, and the woman isn't able to get pregnant, she will be jealous of people that she's not even married to. If her friend celebrates getting pregnant on the first try, second try, and it only took 2 months, she's going to feel jealousy. That's not anybody else's fault but her own. Or she's going to be envious. That's her fault. That's something that she has to deal with, right? And in the Bible, is not considered bad. And then lastly, you have the situation of, I'm just using situations off the top of my head. 2 Chronicles 24, Joash, right? Joash was 7 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother's name was Zibiah, and she was from Beersheba. And Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. Jehoiada took for him 2 wives and had sons and daughters. People would say, well, that doesn't mean that he never lied or anything. I agree. But I would say that the very next thing that said that after it says he was right in the eyes of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest, I would say the very next thing that stated is included in that. That has to be the more common sense take. Has to be, right? I cannot be described as twisting anything when I say that the very next thing that was stated wasn't wrong in the eyes of the Lord, right? And Joash did end up falling, but why was his fall? What was his fall attributed to? It was attributed to the death of Jehoiada the priest. It said, after the death of Jehoiada, however, the officials of Judah came and paid homage to the king, and he listened to them. He abandoned the house of the Lord and the God of their fathers, and served Asherah poles and idols. So wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this guilt of theirs. Nevertheless, the Lord sent prophets to bring the people back to him and testify against them, but they would not listen. So bad counsel is the reason. When he had Jehoiada, so his downfall had nothing to do with the fact that he had one wife, two wives, 10 wives, any of that. So, yes, and in the situation with David, obviously his, I won't say his situation ended up badly, but what did end up bad was because of his adultery, not the fact that he had multiple wives and all of these different things. So, just wanted to make my point about that narrative. It contradicts their own points about how marriages will have seasons of difficulty and marriage is hard and you have to work at it. But I guess people with multiple wives don't get that same grace that they can go through troubles. It's very inconsistent. It completely contradicts their whole thing of description versus prescription when they try to use this line of argumentation. So yeah, that's the video.